Can you hold that? Okay. So because we're going to search for a vein that's high, in other words, higher than expected, I always leave the guide wire down the inferior vena cava and I introduce my multipurpose catheter alongside of it so that I can bring the sheath back and not fear losing access. Can we reposition a little bit higher and show us a little bit more to the right? Yeah, and let's pull the table a little bit over toward you. A little bit more. That's wonderful. Great. So wherever you think the hepatic vein is probably higher. So the first thing is to bring the sheath back. We'll leave that wire down in the inferior vena cava. And now I'm going to start looking for the hepatic vein. On the MR, the hepatic vein really wasn't visible. And that, I'm sure, has something to do with a small scarred liver. If I think I'm back in the heart, I can simply re-advance the sheath into place. And always inject a little bit of contrast to see that I'm really at the atriocaval junction there. I'm going to use the sheath to point my catheter toward the anticipated location of the hepatic vein, which we didn't see on the MR. Okay, that's up in the atrium. And as I mentioned, the liver is quite shrunken and small. So, like anything else, we've picked a challenging case, as many TIPS cases are. And it may be that we have to shift to a different shaped catheter. Usually the multipurpose shape, A or B, is ideally suited to it. A cobra may let you into the hepatic vein faster, but may ill-serve you because as quickly as there's access, the cobra tip points in the wrong direction, which is the cephalic wall of the hepatic vein when we want it to head down horizontally or towards 7 o'clock. So there's some other tricks for getting into the hepatic vein, like changing catheters, knowing to look in a higher position. We'll try looking a little bit lower. But we're looking for, in this case, the right hepatic vein, and hopefully there is one to work with. I'm using the sheath rotation to try to turn the catheter. And my preference is not to use a left hepatic vein because I know his left lobe is small, but seeing that we're in something, I'll at least take a peek. But working in a small cirrhotic liver is like working in a very tight space. There isn't a lot of room to maneuver. The angles of the needle have to be adjusted. That's an hepatic vein, but a rather small one, but there is a clue to the remainder of the hepatic vein there. So it's a little bit of an upward angle. And while guide wire is not usually necessary, we may actually employ one here to get out of that branch and to head down the main trunk. So we'll take a guide wire, and here we have a hydrophilic coated wire with a long floppy tip. And we'll see if we can encourage it to buckle down the main trunk rather than that little branch by giving up a little bit of access. And that's one of the things about interventional radiology, is a constant reminder that the things you take for granted on one day may be more challenging on another day. Keeps our head on straight. In general, I'm looking for an average of 15 minutes of fluoroscopy for all TIPS procedures, working with a trainee or otherwise, recognizing that, of course, a portal vein thrombosis will be different, small hepatic veins, but Chiari. But on average, that's my goal. And we'll talk about the portal puncture in the next few cases. But I think of the TIPS as a bit of a pentathlon. You can't move to the next event until you complete the first trial. And here we are in what is typically the easiest trial, trying to get out of the gate. Now, if that was our only choice, we could actually use that vein. But how would be interesting if I simply showed you a completely straightforward case? Okay. Now, the next thing is to get the sheath down. In this case, that means getting the sheath into the hepatic vein. So what I'll do is I'll take that wire that was sitting down the vena cava that you can still see, and I'll actually take the back end of it and introduce it into the hepatic vein, like a continuous loop. So I'm putting the back end in as a stiffener, as an anchor. I'm not going to exit the catheter, but there it is. I'm going to draw it back out of the vena cava, and there's less wire to handle, which is often an advantage if you're not working with a very large team of assistants. And then you can drive the sheath into it. So at this point, it's easier to do your injections without having to inject the sheath, inject the 5-French catheter, and potentially under-inject or wedge undesirably. So we can get a nice large volume free hepatic venogram by injecting the sheath. A little more contrast. Okay, so surprisingly good-sized right hepatic vein. At the very top of it, we can see some tiny flash filling if we pick an image of the marginal vein, which would be at the top of the liver. So there are at least 1 or 2 other branches that might be in a more cephalic and probably more posterior position should this one be a difficult vein to work with. So at this point, we're ready to start making our punctures. Very often people use carbon dioxide portography, and I have no objection to using it to try to image or locate the portal vein, but in general, the vein is going to be halfway back from the sheath's position now and straight down, and that's where we're going to start making our punctures. If we have to troubleshoot because we can't get access from that position, then we'll use some other means.